Professor Mahesh TR to give an introduction about a resource person of the day. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, madam. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Mr. Sudhindra Prasad, who is an ISTQB certified in quality assurance and testing engineer. Mr. Sudhindra pursued his master's in software engineering from University of Hertfordshire, United Kingdom. He has got 11 years of experience in testing and 8 years in performance testing and 2 years of manual testing. He has worked and handled projects on Java, .NET, SAP applications, proficient in using various performance testing tools like Micro Focus Load Runner, JMeter, Selenium, HP Performance Center, and have worked with the clients across the globe. He has worked in Netherlands, Belgium, UK, West Africa, and traveled across the globe to meet the project deadlines and have excelled at work. And currently, he is working on Java cloud-based application containers on PaaS, that is Platform as a Service platform. On behalf of the organizing committee, I welcome you, Mr. Sudhindra Prasad. Welcome you once again. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Mahesh. It's my pleasure to be part of this session today, and let us have a wonderful session together. And let me share my screen now. Hi, all the participants here. I welcome you to this wonderful journey of learning performance engineering. Before starting with performance engineering, you need to know that this is the actual concept where you have infinite possibilities. So I call that it is performance engineering is a word of infinite possibilities. So please let me know. You can see my screen, right? Like I have shared my screen, so everybody is able to see my screen. Professor Mahesh,
You can now.
yeah, yeah. So now, I have always been curious to learn newer things. So I have, due to the interaction with the greater people, so you need to have aspirations in life, and also you get inspired from people. So one of my managers, who was really a outstanding manager with respect to knowing technology. So her name was Purnima. So through her, I learned a lot of stuff, and today we'll present you to the world of performance engineering, Neural Pruning, which is a one-stop e-learning solution. So you can visit the site on neuralpruning.com. So here we train from class 10 till the highest degree. So we start with class 10, 11, 12th engineering, and then IT related trainings and GRE TOEFL trainings for going abroad and studying abroad. Before I start with performance engineering, let me tell you what does normally an engineer does. So what is the job of an engineer? So engineer is a professional who would bring the theory, whatever the theory that you learn in the 4 years of your engineering course, you bring that theory into practical use. So you try to solve problem across the globe. Problem can be anywhere across the globe. Problem can be between couple, problem can be within society, problem can be within government, problem can be within the business. So as an engineer, you try to solve problems. Problem needs to be addressed in an innovative way. So that is the job of an engineer. So when you say engineering, so what is engineering? Engineering is nothing but the stages involved in developing something. The something can be a product, something can be a machine, something can be anything in this world. So when you want to develop anything, you need to have, or you need to follow certain stages, or you need to go through of phases. So those phases involved in developing something is called as engineering. Okay. So now you need to also understand that how you start your journey is most important in life. Okay, beginning is the most important part of the work. So this is told by the person called Plato, who is the person who discovered the term academy. So academy started from Plato. Okay, so now let us let me give you a brief introduction about myself. I have close to 12 plus years of experience working in performance testing and engineering. I've done my BA and MSc. MSc was from in software engineering from University of Hertfordshire in London. So I'm an ISTQB certified professional, and I'm a founder of Neural Pruning. And as Professor Mahesh told that, like I've worked in various places across the globe, and I've worked with organizations like Sysdem, Tech Mahindra, Walmart, IBM, Oracle, to name few. And what are the testing tools that I'm familiar with? So we have various testing tools. So today I'll tell you what are those tools. Now, just to name them, so we have HP LoadRunner. When I started LoadRunner, it was initially held by the company called HP. So the latest version of LoadRunner is 2020. So the latest version of LoadRunner belongs to a company called Microfocus. When I started my journey, it was HP LoadRunner with the version called 9.5. So then I worked with 11, 12, and then we also have something called Performance Center. So I have an experience on that. Neoload, JMeter, Oats, and Selenium. And we also have experience working with profiling tools like JProfiler, SQL Profiler, JVisualVM, and JConsole. And there are various other monitoring tools like SiteScope, Dynatrace. And for tuning on the database, I've also worked with generation of AWS reports and Oracle diagnostics. So, what are the technologies on which I've worked with? So, I've worked with technologies that involve web HTTP or HTML protocol, HTTPS protocol, SOAP or REST based web services, Ajax True Client, Oracle Web, COM protocol, and JDBC and SAP Web. So, I'll tell you what are all this in the coming slides. Okay. So, now today's objective of learning. So we learn various concepts today, and you'll also see practically with the animated videos how things work within a JVM and other things. Okay, so we start with performance engineering as an overview, and then we learn about what are critical systems, what are emergent property of a system, what is the software development life cycle, and what are the different types of testing, and what are the emerging and booming technologies that we have as of today in 2020. And then we'll also learn about types of application software. And most of us do not know the basic stuff, how the internet works. So I'll teach you something which you are aware of, but you do not know the real concept. So I'll walk you through various concepts. So actually, performance engineering is a topic which would cover many subjects. That is starting with your C programming, and then your operating system, software engineering, software architecture, networking, and then also it will teach you about various object-oriented programming languages. So this is one of the technology where a person who is involved in will work with different items related to technology. It can be the system programming, it can be application programming, it can be with respect to big data, it can be with respect to machine learning, it can be with respect to IoT. So it covers wider range of technologies. So that's the reason I recommend people who wants to have an innovative mind and also a creative thought processing. So this is the real world where exactly you'll get to experience all this. Okay, then we'll understand what are the objectives of performance testing. We'll also go through the life cycle of performance engineering, and we'll take up one of the tools. I'll teach you how the tool works actually, and the tool architecture will be explained, and we'll go through different types of performance testing and monitoring and diagnostics. And then within performance monitoring, we have different types of monitoring like client side monitoring, network monitoring, server monitoring, and also we learn the difference between the use of HTTP and HTTPS protocol. And we'll also understand Jvm architecture and how the garbage collection happens within Jvm and what is a heap memory. All this we see through the animation, and you'll get to know the real aspect of how the Jvm function. And then we'll also understand the architecture of one tier, two tier, and three tier applications. And you'll also learn about what are the different types of servers that we have, how do we fine tune these servers in order to have the best performance from the server side. So we'll also give you certain guidelines that you need to follow as a developer, as a design engineer, as a tester, in order to have your system to perform as expected from the client. Okay, so let us go through the class now. Everybody is aware of what system is. So system. So as you know, you need to be very curious, like the character in Three Idiots, like Amir Khan. So rather than just studying from the textbook, you need to have that creative mind to understand everything that you learn. So now let me walk you through that process of understanding things. So now a system. When I say system, what is a system? It is just a collection of hardware and software components which are integrated together to achieve a goal or a task. Okay, so now you understand what system is. When you add or prefix a critical term to a system, it becomes a critical system. So what is a critical system then? Critical system is nothing but system whose failure will have huge loss with respect to money, time, and effort. Okay, so any system, if it fails, there's a huge implication with respect to money, time, and effort is called as a critical system. Okay, now what are the types of critical system that we have? We have three types of critical system. One is business critical system, mission critical system, and safety critical system. Let me give you a case study, real world case study, to make you connect to the concept. When I say business critical system, it is nothing but the critical system used in the business in order to achieve its business objective. So for example, everybody is aware of company called Pepsi. So Pepsi is the company which manufactures cool drink, right? So now in the early 1992, in the May 1992, Pepsi went into a country called Philippines. They wanted to do a promotional activity in Philippines. They were new to Philippines. So during the early 1990s, the only brand which was known was Coke. So they wanted to go into Philippines, which is a new market, and they wanted to advertise and get the market share in the country Philippines. So with this intention, they went with the advertising campaign stating that people who get a number 349 on the underside of the Pepsi cap will win 1 million pesos. Okay, so 1 million peso is approximately equal to 40,000 US dollars. So this is where their advertising strategy. Okay, so now they hired a company to print random numbers on the underside of the Pepsi cap. Okay, so now the company was asked to print one bottle out of 10 lakh bottles with the number 349. What did this company do is it started printing the random numbers without analyzing or testing their product of printing the numbers. They released the numbers and these numbers were printed on the cap. And when the advertise started and once the product started moving around in the market, people started buying Pepsi bottles. And after that, 8 lakh bottles were printed with the number 349. This is a real world scenario. So one bottle out of 10 lakh bottles should be printed. But here, 8 lakh bottles were printed with the number 349. This was an error in the software that caused a huge loss to the company. So what happened is initially Pepsi refused to pay out money to the people who got the number 349. But later the people who got the number 349, they went into the court. They had a claim on in the court and they won over the case and Pepsi had to pay out 4 billion US dollars. This was not a simple loss. It was a huge uh, acceptable loss that happened to the Pepsi. Okay, so that's the reason a critical system used in business should not fail. There was a huge loss with respect to time. They lost a lot of time in spending in the advertisement, and they lost money, and they lost also the effort, and also the brand value of the company got reduced. Okay, so people will start making they'll start teasing us. So if we are in the business, we need to be really well well maintained, and at the same time our reputation makes a huge implication in order to survive in the market. So you need to understand that testing plays a crucial role whenever you develop a product. Then comes mission critical system. So now let us assume that Professor Mahesh, okay, he wants to travel from Earth, he wants to move out of Earth due to Corona, he wants to move out of Earth and reach Mars. Okay, so that is his objective. So now this mission critical system is nothing but critical system used to achieve a goal oriented task. Okay, so any critical system which is used to achieve a goal oriented task is called as a mission critical system. Now, so Professor Mahesh goes to Professor Vivek and tells that, sir, I'm fed up of being on Earth. I want to go to Mars. Now, Professor Vivek says that, sir, this is really nice. Actually, I'm developing a piece of code which will calculate the right direction to move out of Earth and reach Mars. Now, Professor Vivek is writing a piece of software code, okay, which will calculate the right direction to move out of Earth and to reach Moon. To reach Mars. Okay, now what happens is Professor Vivek writes this piece of code and then he gives this piece of code to Professor Mahesh. Now, Mahesh depends on this code, he believes on this code, and then he starts his journey traveling from Earth towards Mars. What happened is Vivek, Professor Vivek, by mistake, he coded x is equal to y instead of x is equal to absolute of y. Okay, he made a simple mistake. The mistake in the code was he needs to code it as x is equal to absolute of y. By mistake, he has coded it as x is equal to y. Okay, so what is the difference that it makes? Assume that the y value is -3. Absolute of -3 is 3. Okay, but in this scenario, x gets the value as -3 instead of 3. So instead of reaching Mars, he'll be lost in the space. So just a single line of mistake in the code made Professor Mahesh to be lost in space. So if you don't analyze this mistake, please watch a movie called Gravity. So you'll understand how big mistake is this. So Professor Mahesh is lost in the space because of Professor Vivek's mistake in the piece of code. Why didn't Professor Vivek did not test the piece of code before handing it over to Professor Mahesh? So again here the testing of the system failed, which resulted in not achieving the goal-oriented activity. Okay. So next type of critical system is safety critical system. As the name tells you, these are the critical system whose failure will result in injury or loss of life to the human beings who use this critical system. So again, I'll give you a case study. So now in London, so in United Kingdom, okay, so United Kingdom offers the largest ambulance service in the world. Okay, so now what happened is in the early 1990s, okay, they were manually picking up calls of the patients to allocate an ambulance in the emergency need so that the ambulance can carry the patients and bring them to the hospitals. Okay, so now you need to understand that how things work in UK is every worker who works in UK pays a small amount called as national insurance, and with this national insurance he is insured for all his medical needs. Okay, so now medical needs are managed by a government agency in UK. So there's no private doctors in UK, you have all government hospitals in UK. So now what happens is when there is a call ranging from 2500 to 5000 calls of the patients who ring in order to get an ambulance in the emergency. Okay, now as UK decided, okay, instead of taking the calls manually, let us have an automation system which can take the calls and address the patient's query and allocate an ambulance. Okay, so now they hired a company and they told the requirements. So their requirement is the automated system should be able to take calls ranging from 2500 to 5000 as the number of calls per day. Then what happened is this company which started developing this automated machine, okay, they developed this automated machine. After developing it, they tested this system with one user. It was able to allocate the ambulance service. They tested with 5 users. It was able to allocate. They tested with 10 users. It was able to allocate. Then they told that we are going to bring the system in the monitoring level where exactly it is a alpha mode of the system which they released, and they told that they are monitoring the system for the first 1 month. Okay, in the first 1 month what they did is only one fourth of the load was allocated to this automated machine, and the 3/4 of the calls were handled by the manual people. So the customer care agents used to pick up the 3/4 of the calls, and 1/4 got diverted on this automated machine. And for the next 1 month, the system
Sorry,
behaved. For the
sir,
next,
sir, sorry to interrupt you. We are in still the critical system slide. Am I right, sir?
yes, we are in the
Sorry,
safety
sorry,
critical system. Yeah.
sorry
So
to.
now, yeah, now the automated machine got one fourth of the calls. For the first 1 month, the automated machine was able to take the load. Okay. After a month, they made the entire load to pass through the automated machine. So then in the first 1 week, the call rates were 800 to 1200. The system behaved absolutely normal. After a week, when the call rates went close to 1600 calls, the system started behaving in a confused state. So the calls made by the patients were unanswered, and most of the call went into an infinite loop, and few of the calls got dropped, and the people who were not answered and the calls which were holded on the call, they all were in the emergency state, and people who did not have their private vehicles, they could not reach the hospital on time, and people lost their lives. Okay, most of the people lost their lives. This is a real world scenario. It was the heading in the London Times that due to the failure of the automated machine, the automated machine was not load tested for the perfected or the real world load, due to which most of the patients lost their lives. So we need to now understand the importance of testing any kind of system. So the systems that we use in the real world, they're all critical systems. So we need to always test these critical systems. So if you don't test a business critical system, you lose money, you lose time, you lose effort. If you don't test a mission critical system, you can't achieve a goal oriented activity. If you don't test a safety critical system, you will lose the life of people across the globe. Okay, so that's the reason every system should be tested. Now, everybody talks about the terms like error, fault, and failure. But what is the difference between all these terms? Error is nothing but the human mistake. So the mistake that the human being, as a human being, we tend to make mistake. So any mistake that we make is called as a error. Okay. When the error manipulate or error manifests in the software, we call such errors as faults, bugs, or defects. Okay. So what is a fault, bug, or a defect? Error occurring within the software, we call it as fault, bug, or a defect. Due to the errors within the software, these errors or the faults, so the special term which is called as fault or a bug or a defect, due to the fault, bug, or a defect in the software, if they are not rectified, it will result in failure of the system. So what is a failure? Failure is nothing but the system is unable to provide the requested service. The system is failing to provide what the service is requested by the client. It is unable to fulfill the request. When the system cannot fulfill the request, it results in the failure of the system. So this is the connectivity between error, fault, bug, or a defect and a failure. Now, every system exhibits certain properties. Okay, so what are those properties? The property is called as emergent property. So this concept you would have learned in software engineering. So what is emergent property? Emergent property is nothing but property of a system as a complete unit. So the property exhibited by the system as a complete unit is called as a emergent property. So now let me take an example of a guy who is a fresher. Okay, he has just prepared for his interview and he wants to go to the interview and attend the interview. Okay, now there are two students who are going to attend the interview, for example. Okay, one student who is formally dressed, another student who is casually dressed. He is a fan of Rajnikant. He wears a dhoti and goes to the interview. Both are technically sound. Okay. Now, both goes to the interview and both are doing, both did well with the technical round. And at the end of the interview, result was announced. One of the person got selected. The person who was casually dressed was rejected, and the person who was formally dressed was selected. Now, let me give you this example. I gave this example to just to make you understand. So now, as a fresher, what is the functional property that you need to exhibit? You need to exhibit the property that for you to clear the interview, you need to be technically sound. So you need to know the technologies that the interviewer is expecting you to know. So that is the functional property of a fresher. Okay. So now, what is the non-functional property of a tester? or a fresher. So the non-functional property is how you dress, how you greet, how you the the how you face the interviewer, okay, your gesture, your posture, all, and your personality and your communication skills. All these are the properties that you need to have in order to clear the interview. Similarly, any system will have two types of property. One is functional property, the other one is non-functional property. The functional property is nothing but the reason for the system's existence. What is the functional features that the system exhibits? Does all the functional features of the system, does it work or not? So you need to make sure all the functional features on the system should work. Okay, that is the functional emergent property. When I say non-functional emergent property, these are the properties, additional properties that the system should exhibit. For example, reliability, safety, security, usability, robustness, and availability. So these are all the non-functional emergent property. Let me give you the overview of each of the term. When I say reliability, assume that you go on internet and you type www flipkart.com. Okay, so now what is the response that you're expecting? You're expecting a response that is the home page of Flipkart. Unfortunately, due to some errors, the Flipkart website returns you a page 500 internal server error. So now, can you call Flipkart as reliable? At this point in time, you call Flipkart as unreliable. Why? Because it failed to service your request. What was your request? You requested for home page, but it delivered you a internal server error page. So now reliability is nothing but it is the ability of the software or the system to provide requested service. I asked Professor Mahesh to give me a treat. Okay, I asked him to give me a treat in a hotel. So he gives me a pen instead of that. So now I'll say, sir, this is unreliable because I expected you to give me a treat, but he's giving me just a pen as a token of gift. So I'll tell him, sir, this is unreliable because you did not serve my request. Similarly, now if you go to a bus stop and you try to board a bus, okay, so now if you go to the bus stop and you board a bus from Majestic to Jayanagar, the bus number state that it takes you to Jayanagar. You buy a ticket for Jayanagar, but the bus takes you to Vijayanagar. Now, in that scenario, can you call the bus as reliable? No, you can't call the bus as reliable because it did not serve your request. You purchased a ticket to Jayanagar, but it took you to Vijayanagar. So now, reliability is something which you don't test the reliability of a system throughout the years or throughout unidentified conditions. For example, reliability is the ability of the system to provide requested service for a specific time under specific condition. Okay, time and condition plays a role. For example, if you go to a bus stop in the midnight 1 o'clock, and if you don't get a government bus at the midnight 1 o'clock, you don't say Karnataka bus service is unreliable. Okay, you can't test it at the midnight 1 o'clock in order to say whether Karnataka bus service is reliable or not. So the time comes into picture. Similarly, you can't go on a day of Bharat Bandh and wait in the bus stop, and if you don't get a bus, you can't say Karnataka bus service is unreliable, right? So reliability, whenever you test it for a certain time under certain condition. Similarly, safety. So assume that I purchase a laptop from Lenovo, okay, and I try to connect it to the charger. With the charger, I try to plug it in. So when I try to plug it in, I meet with an electric shock. Now, can I call the Lenovo laptop to be safe device? No, I cannot, because if I try to touch the device, it gives me an electric shock, or it tries to give me a problem to my normal uh, normal human condition. So it does not allow me to use it because it's not safe. Similarly, we say that we should not use a Chinese mobile phone because we have read it and we have got it, we have understood from our friends that while charging it burst out. So now you don't use any product that is not safe. So you need to also test a product in order to check whether it is safer to use by the end users. Similarly, security. So now you board a bus, the bus conductor will show you a knife and he'll say, give me all your valuables. So will you board a bus where the bus conductor is not give, allowing you to have a secure journey? So when you say security, it is nothing but does the system allow unauthorized access to the application? So for example, assume that I need to give 1 lakh rupees to Professor Mahesh. So now what I'll do, I'll transfer my fund from my account Citibank to my sir's account. Okay. Now, before doing a transaction, my balance in my Citibank account is 5 lakh rupees. After I do the transaction of transferring 1 lakh rupees, I observe that my balance is zero. When I see that balance to be zero, will I ever do a transaction with Citibank? No. Why? Because Citibank account is not secured. It allowed somebody to hack onto my account and take away all my money. So any system should also be tested whether it is secured. So the difference between safety and security is safety is checking whether there is any kind of physical damage to the end user, whereas security is checking whether the application allows unauthorized access to the system's data. So it should not allow anybody to misuse the system. Okay. So all the systems should be tested for reliability, safety, security feature. Then usability. Everybody in this world is whenever there's something which is easy to use, easy to understand, easy to learn, everybody will buy that. If something is not easy to use, if something is not easy to learn, if something is not easy to understand, nobody wants to use that product. So you need to also test whether your product is easy to use, easy to understand, and easy to learn. Then only the product can sustain in the competitive market. Okay. Then the next property is robustness. Robustness is nothing but I open flipkart.com. I try to log into flipkart.com with my username and password, but it is taking 5 minutes to log in. So will I ever come back to Flipkart? No, I'm sorry. It wasted my 5 minutes of time. So it's not giving a response within the desired time. These days, any response less than 10 seconds, nobody would wait beyond 10 seconds, right? So before that, make sure your internet connectivity is also sharp. So it is also depends on the internet connectivity. So if you have higher bandwidth, so you'll be able to reach onto the website faster. Okay, so you need to check every product whether it responds to the user query at a faster rate. So checking that is called as robustness. Availability. Is the system available throughout the day? If I try to log into Flipkart in the midnight, it should be available. If I try to access Flipkart in the early morning, it should be available. So it should be available throughout the day. Any system which is not available throughout the day, again, it is going to lose its market share. Okay. So always remember any system apart from being functionally stable, so you need to also exhibit non-functional properties like reliability, safety, security, usability, robustness, and availability. Now, any software application will have three different types of architecture. The first type of architecture is one tier architecture. Okay. So when I say one tier architecture, you know that let me first define what is software. So what is software? Software is nothing but it is collection of programs that are bundled together in order to achieve a user task. It can be a task or a system task. Okay. So you can develop a software for a system, you can develop a software for an application. So when you develop a software for a system, you call it as a system software. When you develop a software for your user application, you call it as an application software. So every software has three layers. What are those three layers? So the three layers of a software is presentation or the front end. The second layer is application or business logic layer. And the third layer is database or the backend layer. Okay. So now please understand this computing word is just a replica of the real word. Okay. Let me just quote a simple example. Okay. Let us for now assume that Professor Mahesh is unmarried. Okay. So now he goes to see a girl. Okay, so he goes to see a girl. Now, what is the first thing that the girl gets impressed by? The first thing that the girl gets impressed by is the looks, the presentation layer. Okay, so if the looks, if she is impressed by, then what is the next property that she looks for? The next property that she looks for is how intelligent Professor Mahesh is. So she asks life-related aptitude question in order to gauge the intelligence level or the intellectual level of Professor Mahesh. Okay, so if he qualifies there, the next kind of test that she does is what are the bank accounts that the Professor Mahesh has and what is his bank balance. So now, so the three qualities that she looks for is how good he is in terms of looking, how good he is with respect to having his intelligence level, and how good is his bank balance. So similarly here, any software product has three layers. One is the presentation layer, the next layer is the application layer, and the third layer is the database layer. When I say presentation layer, so this is the layer that the user interacts with. Okay, so right now I've opened a PowerPoint presentation. So now this is the layer that I'm interacting with. This layer is called as a presentation layer provided by PowerPoint. Okay, now when I go to file menu and click on save, so this information, it calls a save API, which will ask me in which location do you want to save it, right? So now when you go to file menu and click on save, you're calling a save API. Where does this API reside on? This API resides on application layer. Okay, application layer is a layer where all the intelligent programs reside. Okay, after the program gets executed, it will ask you in which location you want to save it, whether you want to save it in C drive, D drive, whether you want to save it on external USB devices that you are connected to the system. So these are the places where you save it. So the database layer is nothing but it is the layer where you store the data. Okay, when all these three layers reside within one system, such a system is called as one tier application. So what is a one tier application? The applications in which all three layers, presentation, application, and data layer, are bundled together and it is given as a software. So for example, your Microsoft Office, AutoCAD, calculator, your notepad, Photoshop, these are all called as one tier application. Okay. The next type of application is two tier application. When I say two tier, as the name tells you, there are two participating machines. When you say tier, it means that how many machines are participating in communication. So as you can see in this diagram, there are two sets of machines which are connected over the network. Okay. So now client layer is the layer where you can have your presentation layer and your application and database can be on the server side. Okay, in this example you have client tier where exactly both the presentation layer and application layer are on the client side and only the database is on the server side. Okay, so if there are in the two-tier architecture, it is also called as client-server architecture. We have two types of client-server architecture. One is thin client architecture. The other one is thick client architecture. So thin client architecture means these are the architecture where exactly only the presentation layer is on the client side, application and database is on the server side. So as the name tells you, thin client means client is less burden. Thick client means client is overburdened. So now client is less burden only when it has presentation layer. The application and database is on the server side. So in the thin, for example, thin client architecture example is your browser. Your browser only provides the presentation. Where is the page is coming from? It is coming from the server. How does the page gets the data? The data is on the database. So now presentation layer is provided by the browser, whereas your application and database is on the server side. So your browser is a thin client architecture. If I take thick client is where you have got your presentation and also the application layer on the client side, whereas only the database is on the server side. Let me give examples. For example, your WhatsApp, your Skype, your Google Talk, your Yahoo Messenger, they're all thick client architecture because you cannot open your Skype without actually logging into the Skype portal, right? So how do you log into Skype? You provide username and password. Who is going to do the check of username and password? The server is going to do it. So you need the internet connection in order to check whether this user with this password exists on the server. So there, the application logic and also the database is on the server side. Even your Microsoft Outlook or your Skype or your Google Gtalk or your Yahoo Messenger, they all fall under the category of thick client architecture. Even your WhatsApp, in your WhatsApp, what is happening? You've got your application logic on the client side, but the all your storage, so the messages gets passed from one person to another person. How does it do it? It will store the data that the messages that the client sends on the intermediate server, and then it will forward it to the recipient. Okay, so the data is getting stored in the intermediate server. So even WhatsApp is an example of thick client architecture. Then comes the three-tier architecture. All your web-based application fall under the category of three-tier architecture. So what is happening? So you use your browser as a thin client. On the browser, you type a URL address. Okay, when you type URL address and click go, okay, your request goes to the first type of server, which is called as web server. Then based on the kind of request, whether it can handle it, if it can handle it, it will only send the response. If it can't handle it, it will send or forward that request to the second type of server, that is the application server. Then application server will run a query on the database and fetch the data in the runtime, and then it will generate dynamically generated web pages and forwards it to the client. And on the client system, it will paint that web page, it will render that web page and display that web page on the client system. So let me give you an example now. How does a browser make a request to the server on the internet? So normally what do? We type the URL address and click on the go button. Okay, when you click on the go button, so what is happening is you use a protocol. So what is a protocol that we normally use on the internet? HTTP or HTTPS. Okay, so I'll tell you the difference between HTTP and HTTPS with the animation video in the further classes. But now, what is a protocol? Let me not go by the definition of textbook. I don't want to just go by the definition of textbook. I'll define protocol as the language used between client and server for communication. So what is a protocol? It is a language used between client and server for communication. So now, how does a client connect to the server? The client connects to the server by using a protocol called TCP/IP protocol. Okay, so how does a client connect to the server? Through TCP/IP protocol. After connecting, the client will start sending the request. To send the request, it uses another protocol called as HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol. Okay, so now you need to understand the difference between the TCP/IP protocol and HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So OSI layer model, as you understand, TCP/IP is a transport layer protocol. Means when the request goes through the network, it goes through the TCP/IP protocol. Whereas when you make a request on the user interface on the browser, what is the protocol you're using? HTTP protocol. Okay, so basically, in order to connect between, in order to establish connection between client and server, we use TCP/IP protocol. After establishing the connection, how does your request go? The request on the web page is nothing but HTML data, right? That HTML data is carried by HTTP protocol. Okay, so HTML data is carried by which protocol? HTTP or HTTPS protocol. On a web page, we have various types of resources. Did you ever wonder what are the types of resources that we have on a web page? We have two types of resources. One is HTML resource, the other one is non-HTML resource. When I say HTML resource, we have your HTML tags, we have your uh, we have your table tags, we have your form tags, we have your button tags. They all fall under the HTML resource. When I say non-HTML resource, you have your images. Images can be in a GIF format. Images can be in PNG format. Image can be in JPEG format. Images can be in various formats. Similarly, you have your audio files, you have your video files. Okay, so audio files, video files, your JavaScript, your images, they all fall under the category of non-HTML resources. Okay, on a web page, we have two types of resources: HTML resources and non-HTML resources. So whenever we try to connect to the server, we connect through the TCP/IP protocol, and the request or response is through HTTP protocol. When we do the request to the server, so for example, assume that I make a request, initial request to the server. So I send a request to neuralpruning.com. When I send a request to neuralpruning.com, what is the first type of server that is there? Web server. So what does web server do is it hosts static web pages. Okay, web server hosts what type of web pages? Static web pages. Why do I use a term called static web pages? Because if Bill Clinton tries to access neuralpruning.com, he gets the same web page. If Professor Mahesh tries to access neuralpruning.com, he gets the same web page. If the CEO of the company tries to access neuralpruning.com, he gets the same web page. The web page that the web server returns is always the same, irrespective of what which user uses the URL, right? So any web page whose content is same for multiple users is called as a static web page. To build a static web page, we use technologies like HTML in order to define how what all elements should appear on your web page. We use HTML. In order to style those elements, we use CSS. In order to make the web pages responsive, we use Bootstrap. Okay, so what do you mean by responsive? These days, web pages are accessed via laptop, via desktop, via mobile phones, via tablets, right? You have various devices through which you access your websites on the internet. So based on the size of the device, automatically the web page should also resize and fit onto the mobile phone or to the laptop or on the desktop. So how does that happen? By using a technology called as Bootstrap. Okay, Bootstrap is a framework which will make the web pages responsive. Got it? So how do you make web pages responsive? By using a technology called Bootstrap. Okay, then comes JavaScript. Even the JavaScript is hosted on the web server. So why do we use JavaScript? Assume that you got a home page of Neural Pruning where exactly you need to log in. So to log in, you need to enter username and password. Okay. Now assume that I'll not enter username, I'll not enter password. I click on sign in. When I click on sign in, okay, so I get a message saying that alert message, please enter username and password. Who is sending this alert? Is it the server who is sending this alert? No. Actually, who is sending this alert is when you access www.neuralpruning.com, that web page is returned by web server. Okay, who is going to send that web page? Web server. On that web page, if I don't enter username password, when I click on sign in, so I get an alert message saying that please enter your username and password. That alert is thrown by JavaScript, which is inside your home page web page. Okay, so what I am trying to tell you is any web page will have HTML code, CSS code, Bootstrap code, and also JavaScript code. Okay, so now instead of talking to the server is somebody who is always busy serving the user request. Okay, you should not make server to serve requests which are not priority requests. So in our scenario, when there is no username password, no need to send this request for the server to do the processing. Okay, this kind of request will be served by the JavaScript within the web page. Such kind of validation is called as client-side validation. So what is a client-side validation? It is the validation done by the web page by using a JavaScript which is embedded inside the web page. Okay, so JavaScript is basically used to do the client-side validation. Okay, now similarly, if I enter a username, assume that on my website, username should be of 6 characters and password should be of 8 characters. If I try to enter a username of 4 characters as username and 6 characters as password, and if I click on sign in, again I get an alert. Again, this type of validation is done by JavaScript. So basically, whenever you try to send any information on your web page, first type of validation is done by the JavaScript. The JavaScript returns a Boolean value. Whenever JavaScript returns a Boolean value as true, then that data is sent to the server. If a JavaScript returns a Boolean value as false, it throws an alert to the end user and it does not communicate with the server. Okay, so you understood what is the use of JavaScript. So whenever you click on a button like sign in button, again a JavaScript is getting called. Okay, so where is this JavaScript? It is inside the HTML page which is already downloaded from the server. Okay, so now you should understand JavaScript is used for client side validation. Apart from that, even clicking on a button, okay, invokes JavaScript. Okay, so all event validation is also done by the JavaScript. Okay, now, so we understood what all reside on the web server. So what are the technologies that reside on web server? HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, and then you also have a JavaScript libraries like jQuery, Angularjs, and also you have React.js. Okay, these are frameworks. Framework. What is framework? Everybody uses a term called framework. Framework is nothing but it is a bundled code, piece of code, which you can use to do some task. Okay, what is a framework? It is a bundled piece of code which you can use to do some task. Okay, it makes your task easier. Okay, so framework is used to make your task easier. Okay, you have various JavaScript frameworks that are available. Okay, now jQuery is one type of framework. Similarly, Ajax. You might have observed what happens is if you open crickinfo.com, assume that there's a match getting played between India and Australia. Now you open crickinfo.com and you'll be working. Okay, every few seconds, even though you don't reload the web page of crickinfo, the scorecard keeps updating. How does it do it? It does it because it uses Ajax there. So what is Ajax? Ajax is nothing but asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So what happens is Ajax is basically used in order to load part of the web page without actually refreshing the web page. Okay, no need of you refreshing the web page. The part of the web page keeps reloading. How does it does it? By using a technology called Ajax. Okay, again, Ajax falls in the category of a technology where it is hosted on the web server. Okay, similarly, AngularJS or React.js. So you might have observed these days you see websites with single page. Everything is on the single page. How does they develop that single page websites? They develop single page websites by using a technology called AngularJS or also called as React.js. So these two are similar kind of JavaScript libraries, but developed by different companies. AngularJS is provided by Google. React.js is provided by Facebook. Okay, so why do we use AngularJS or React.js? To build single page web applications. Okay, so what is this AngularJS? It is again a JavaScript library framework. Okay, so now all these client technologies are residing on web server. Next comes your application server. Now assume that I enter a valid username and valid password and click on sign in the Neural Pruning website. So when I give a valid username and valid password, again JavaScript gets called. This time JavaScript returns a Boolean value true. When it returns true, then the JavaScript calls a servlet which is residing on the application server. Okay, so then that servlet will execute and then that servlet tries to check whether this user called Mahesh with the password called Mahesh123 really exists in the database. So how does it check whether the user account Mahesh exists in the database? By running a query on the database server. So how does it run a query on the database server? It makes a JDBC connection or ODBC connection to the database and runs a query. Okay, when it runs a query, so it runs a query, for example, select username comma password from users where username is Mahesh and password is Mahesh123. Then the database returns the username password details related to the user called Mahesh. Select star. Why star? Because it needs to pop up various information related to Mahesh. So select star from users where username is equal to Mahesh and password is equal to password 123. So then when it returns the data from the server, that is the database server, to the application server, now dynamically these data needs to be populated. Normally what happens when you try to log into Gmail, it will say welcome Professor Mahesh, and then it starts showing the emails related to Professor Mahesh. How does it show this information? This all information is getting fetched from the database. So at runtime, it is trying to create a dynamic web page. So now on the application server, you have technologies like you can use Java to create servlets, you can use .NET to create servlets, you can use PHP to create servlets. So servlets can be created by using various technologies like PHP, Java, or .NET. Okay, so this piece of code, initially the servlet gets called. The servlet, what it does, it will create a JDBC object and then it connects with the database server. Okay, so all this Java and JTEE related technology related code is deployed on the application server. When the data from the server, that is the database server, comes to the application server, it makes use of a technology, another technology called as JSP, or it makes use of ASP in order to create web pages which are dynamic in nature. So dynamic web pages are created by using technologies like JSP or ASP. Okay, JSP or ASP is used for creating what? Dynamic web pages. Even the JSP and ASP code is deployed on the application server. Okay, so now in order to develop a website, initially what I do, I create a database. The database related, all database related information I deploy it on the database server. Okay, so you have database services provided by Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, and then you have now NoSQL databases, Mongo database, and various other databases. So when I teach about databases, I'll give you overview of what is data, what is big data, and other various technologies. Most of the times people just confuse you. They'll not give you the real world information. For example, when an end user does a business on Amazon.com or Flipkart.com, what kind of database is used there? They use a transactional database. Okay, but what does Flipkart use or Amazon use in order to check what kind of users are accessing their website, what kind of product the users are buying? So there comes analytical database. So you need to know there is a difference between transactional database and analytical database. Okay, transactional database is nothing but your RDBMS. Okay, your SQL server, your Oracle server, your MySQL, they're all called as transactional database or relational database. Okay, so your big data is not a relational database, it is analytical database. Okay, so I'll teach you all that in our Neural Pruning site. If you register, you get to know a lot of other stuffs which are needed for you in order to evolve. For now, understand that on the database server, you have your database. Okay, so even when the database returns the data at runtime, the dynamic web pages are created on the application server, and then it returns it back to the end user saying that welcome Professor Mahesh, this is your student dashboard. Okay, so this page is coming from actually the database server. Okay, so based on the user request, the home page is coming from web server. When you try to login page is getting constructed dynamically at runtime on the application server by fetching the data from the database. Okay, so how does the internet really works? It connects via TCP/IP protocol, and then it sends the request and the response comes via HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So if you have your presentation layer on one server, if you have your business logic on another server, and if you have your data on another server, so how many participating machines are there? There are 1, 2, and 3 participating machine. So such a system is called as 3-tier application. So here the number represents how many machines are participating. So in reality, there are 4 machines. You're also using client system here. So anything beyond 3 call it as N-tier architecture. Okay, it is not necessary that you need to separate presentation and application. You can also create websites by using both presentation and application on one server. But that kind of methodology is suited for smaller application. When your application is huge, we separate the presentation from the application server. So let us go to the next slide. Software application. As you know, there are two types of software application: system software and application software. Software which are designed in order to connect or talk to the hardware. The softwares that directly talk to the hardware, they're all called as system software. So what are the softwares that directly talk to the hardware? Your operating system, your compilers, your interpreters, your device drivers. When you connect a USB device, there's a program that gets installed. Even that program communicates with the hardware, right? Device driver, antivirus, your debuggers, assemblers, your Linux operating system, Windows operating system, they're all called as system software because they directly connect with the hardware. So all the system softwares are developed by using programming languages like C, C++. So most of the students do not know why do we need to learn so many technologies. So basically students don't get into the concept thinking that, oh, big data is the only evolving concept or IoT is the only evolving concept. That is completely untrue. People who misguide, they do not know the actual reality. Every technology is needed. If you want to build a house, you need a person from the house architect, and then the constructor, builders. You need every kind of person in order to build a house. Similarly, to build a software, you need different kind of technologies. System softwares are built by using C or C++. Okay, C and C++ is still in use. It will be always in use. Okay, the next type of software is application software. So what is application software? The softwares that run on top of the operating system is called as application software. So can you install Microsoft Office without installing an operating system? We can't do it. Can you install Photoshop without having operating system? We can't do it. Can you install antivirus without having operating system? You can't do it. Any software that runs on top of a operating system is called as a application software. Example: your Microsoft Office, your Photoshop, your AutoCAD, your any software that is installed on top of your operating system is called as what? Application software. And application softwares are developed by using languages like Java, PHP, .NET, C Sharp, and various other languages. Now, let us also understand the difference between object-oriented and object-based programming languages. So when I say object-oriented, so you know that the concepts that it should support is abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. Okay, so you start with object, class, then comes abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism. When all these features are supported, then such a language we call it as C++ and Java. Okay, when I say object-based programming language, it says it is the language which supports classes, objects, abstraction, encapsulation, but it does not support inheritance and polymorphism. So for examples of such languages are JavaScript and VB script. Okay, so for example, let me tell you, your programming languages are your object-oriented programming languages are compiled and interpreted, whereas object-based language, it is only interpreted. Okay, in order to interpret JavaScript, no need of you doing it. The browser does it at runtime. So browser itself does the interpretation. So all these object-based programming languages came into existence after internet boomed. Okay, so this JavaScript allows your HTML to do the activity which HTML by itself can't do. So I told you, client-side validation is done by JavaScript. How does this JavaScript code gets executed? It gets executed on the browser by default. How does that happen? Because it is a object-based programming languages. Okay, object-based programming languages are interpreted, they're not compiled. Okay, got it? Now, what is the difference between programming and scripting language? So programming languages are used to build any product from the scratch. So you can build any product. It can be a application software or a system software. Okay, so you use basically programming languages to build system software and application software, whereas scripting language is not used to build application from scratch. Then why do we use scripting language? We use scripting language to automate certain tasks. Okay, so you hear that Python everywhere. Python is programming language for internet. Okay, it is not a language for development. So always remember this. Don't get fooled saying that Python is the only trending language in today's world. So Python is not a development language. It's a scripting language. Similar to Python, you have various other scripting languages like JavaScript, ASP, JSP, PHP, Perl, TCL. TCL is nothing but Tickle. It is a language which is called as Tickle, which is a language which is a scripting language. Like similarly, you have Ruby and Python. Scripting language is used to add functionality to a web page. Okay. Similarly, if you want to automate your generic activity, in order to automate your generic activity, you can make use of your scripting languages. Okay. So next slide is, so as you know, software application has three layers: presentation, application, and data layer. And then what are the types of software applications that we have? We have Windows or desktop or standalone application. Such application is also called as one tier application. Then you have client server application, and then you have web-based applications. Okay. So now software development lifecycle. What are the stages that the software goes through? Initially, if you want to assume that I want to open a training center. So if I want to open a training center, what is the first thing that I need to do? I need to set up a office. In order to set up a office, first I need to understand, I need to have a training room. Okay. In that training room, I need to have seating arrangement made in order to allow the trainees to sit inside the training room. Now, I need to assume that I want to book for the chase. I want to order for the chase. When I need to order for the chase, I go to a place where they manufacture chase. So I go there and I'll tell my requirement. So a person, a business analyst, is nothing but the requirements capturing guy. He comes to me and he'll sit with me. He'll ask me, sir, could you please brief out your requirement? So I'll say, I want chase. That is, I want around 500 chase. Okay, which should have a ability to allow people to sit on the chair, and at the same time should have a laptop holder in order to place their laptop. Now, the requirements capturing guy will ask me a few questions. Sir, could you please tell me what should be the make of the chair? It should be wooden made, or it should be plastic made, or it should be made of another material. Then he'll ask me a question. Sir, what is the student type that sits on this chair? So could you please tell me what should be the load that the chair should be able to sustain? So I'll say, oh yeah, I did not think about it. So I'll tell him, okay, the students can vary between their weight can vary between 40 kgs to 150 kgs, because in including the laptop, I need to calculate this weight of the chair. I need to calculate the weight of the person and the laptop who is sitting on the chair. So I say anything ranging between 40 to 150 kgs. Then he'll ask me, sir, could you please tell me what is the design that you want? He'll show me a few designs and he'll tell me which design do you prefer. Then he'll tell me what should be the color of the chair. Then he'll tell me what should be the uh, what should be the uh, 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 what do you say, the how usable it is. So all that, like, he asked me a lot of questions and I need to answer all those questions. And after that, he'll make a note of all my answers to the questions that he asked. Then what he'll do, he'll go to the next person who is going to design that chair. So then this requirements engineer will tell me, sir, please wait, I'll give you a plan. Okay, I'll approve the plan and to approve the plan, I'll share you the plan. Then what he'll do, he'll sit with this designer and he'll go through the requirement and he'll create a plan. Then he'll share that plan to me. Then once I give the approval of the plan, then what he'll do, he'll develop that chairs. After he develop, he'll do a regular testing. He'll check what all requirements was given by me. Does it meet all the requirements? And he'll do normal testing. He'll throw the chair. It should be able to sustain. He'll make sure he'll ask people to sit on the chair. Okay, he'll make a person who is heavily weighed to sit on a chair. He'll make the person who is less weight to sit on the chair. And then once his testing is done, what he'll do, he'll say, sir, your product is ready for the delivery, but before that, please come to our place and test it yourself. That is alpha testing. He'll call me there. So I'll go into his place, I'll sit, I'll check all my features are met. If my features are not met, I'll say, oh God, you have not met this feature. Can you please rework on it? Then again, he'll rework and again, he'll call me. Then when I go there, I check, I make sure it's working fine. Then I'll ask him, please please deliver this chase to my training academy. So when he delivers the chase, he'll also give an agreement saying that, sir, for the next 1 year, the maintenance of the chair is free of cost, or you need to pay me this much amount of money in order to maintain the chair. Okay, so then I'll agree on to it. Then he gives the maintenance for the next 1 year. Similar to that, anything that we do goes through the life cycle. What is that life cycle? Requirements capturing, designing, development, testing, and then alpha testing, beta testing, and then it is in the operation and it needs to be maintained. So it's so easy. So always link it to the real world. So now let me come back to the software development. Similarly here, you're planning. After planning, designing comes into picture, designing and coding. Okay, then comes the building of it, and then testing of it, then you deploy it, then the operation happens, then you need to monitor it. Why do you need to monitor? Assume that you deploy it on the production server. After a few days, I gave an example of London ambulance service automated machine. It failed. You need to keep monitoring the system throughout its lifetime. So these are the different stages involved. Now, you know that we have various models for software development. You have your waterfall model, you have your V model, all your legacy systems follow waterfall and V model. These days, all your internet applications follow agile methodology. So what is agile methodology? It is incremental iterative development. Rather than developing entire product at one time, you develop the product bits by bit. Okay, bit by bit you develop it, and at the same time the requirements keep changing. Every release, after every release, the requirement keeps changing and requirements keeps adding. Okay, so now for planning and code bus. Okay, initially for planning. Okay, so what do you do in the planning? I told you your requirements capturing and designing comes into picture. So normally we use tools like Jira in order to do the project management. Okay, how do you in agile terminology we call it as user stories. Okay, all your requirements are called as what? User stories. How do you manage it? By using a project management tool called as Jira. So what is a Jira? Jira is a project management tool which is used to manage the user stories. Okay, what is user story? User story is nothing but requirements given by the customer. Okay, then in order to uh, create the code, in order to create the code, okay, the developer creates the code. Not one developer will be working on the code. There will be multiple developers working on the code. So they maintain the local copy of the code, and one more copy they maintain it on a server. This server is accessible by other developers also. Such server is called as concurrent version system. So there is a interdependency between modules. Assume that one developer is developing one module, another developer is developing another module. You need to integrate these modules and test it. So how can you get access to another module developed by another developer? We get access because all these modules copy is maintained in a central repository. Such central repository is called as concurrent version system. So example for concurrent version system is your Git. Okay, Git is a concurrent version system. Then after you are done with your coding, all codes should be merged together and you build a system. Okay, so you build a runtime execution file. You create a runtime execution file. To create runtime execution file in a agile world, we use tools like Maven or Gradle. Okay, so what are the tools used for creating a runtime execution file? Maven or Gradle. Okay, after you create the runtime execution file, so that needs testing. So who is going to do the testing? The testing team is going to do the testing. So normally here the code level, it is still at the code level. The code level testing is also done by the developer. Okay, the code level testing is done by developer. I'll come through the different types of testing in the coming slides. For now, who is going to do the code level testing? The code level testing is done by the developer. Okay, so now the application testing, that is, once you create the runtime environment, such runtime environment testing is done by using a tool like Selenium. So Selenium is a functional testing tool, okay, which is used for web-based application testing. It's a freeware, okay, it's a freeware which is used to do what? Web-based application testing. Okay, then you need to deploy it on the production server. After you test it, you need to deploy it on the production server. For deployment, okay, what is a tool that you use? Dockers. Dockers are used to, you create a Docker. I'll tell you what is Docker later. For now, Docker is used to create a container. That container can be deployed on a server. Okay, so always remember, when you say server, server is nothing but a bucket. So if you want to store water, you use a small glass if it is less quantity. If you want to store water for drinking, you use a Bisleri bottle. If you want water, you want to store water for taking bath, so you store it in a bucket. So server is nothing but, it's like a bucket where you store the related information. So what is server? Server is a bucket which stores the related information. Okay, now after the code is tested, and the code is tested for functionality, and the code is tested for non-functional features like reliability, safety, security, usability, robustness, availability, then you deploy the code on the application, you deploy it on the live. Okay, so it is on the production server. So to deploy it, we make use of Docker containers or Chef. Chef is a code which is used to deploy the containers on the production servers. Then after you deploy it, you need to manage it. And how do you manage it? By monitoring the servers. So it is under operation, you need to monitor it in order to check how it is behaving on the production server. Now, see what happened is, in the waterfall and V model, most of this activity like uh, creating the code, and then building the code, and then testing the code, it was all done by different set of teams. But in agile world, okay, so all this activity after coding, all this activity of testing till the testing is automated by using a open source tool called as Jenkins. So what is Jenkins? Jenkins is an open source freeware which is used to automate the activity of doing, building the software and testing the software. So what is Jenkins? Jenkins is an open source tool which is used to automate the activity of deploying and testing the software. Got it? So building, deploying, and testing. So deployment can be in the test servers, deployment can be on the production servers. So you can use it in any way. So normally, what is the use of Jenkins tool? Jenkins is a freeware which is an automation tool which is used to automate the activities involved in building the software, testing the software, and deploying the software. Okay, so we make use of Jenkins. Okay, so now, as per the definition of me, I don't go by the textbook definition. So what is testing? Testing, as per me, is an investigation. Okay, when there is a murder which happens, so Sushant Singh Rajput, so now they have given this case to CBI. What is CBI doing here? Now they are going to investigate. So now similarly, testing is the process of investigation done on a software product. Why do we need to do the investigation? In order to gauge the quality of the software, in order to identify defects, bugs, or faults in the software. Why do we need to identify defects? Because if the defects are existing on the software, that defect will result in failure of the system or the software. If the failure occurs, you cannot sustain in the market. Your product does not sell in the market. That's the reason. Make sure we need to identify the defects in the software or the system, and also to check, does it meet the market standard. When I say market standard, I need to check whether the software is reliable, safer, secure, usable, robust, and available. Okay, so what is testing? So when you go to an interview, never define anything by textbook. Please be like Rancho in Three Idiots. So understand and then tell in your own definition. So what is testing? It is an investigation that we are doing in order to gauge the quality of the software, to identify defects, bug, or faults in the software, and at the same time to check whether it meets the market standard. Okay. When you say quality, what is quality? Everybody use term called quality. Quality is nothing but it is the degree to which it meets the customer requirement. So for whom are you developing the software? We are developing a software for a group of people. So does it meet their expectation? Okay. So quality is what? It is the degree to which it meets the customer's expectation. Okay. So now exhaustive testing is impossible. When I say exhaustive testing, it means that testing the system 100% is highly impossible. Why? I'll give an example. The example is, assume that you want to test a 10 character string, okay, with different combination of alphabets. Okay, just to test 10 character string with different combination of alphabets, it takes 4 times the age of the universe to test all the combination. Imagine this, just to test a 10 character string, okay, with various combination of alphabets. So if you want to test a 10 character string, for example, let me say Mahesh, 6 character string. So with this 6 character string, you try to test with different alphabets. Instead of M, you put it there A, try it with B, try it with C. Like that, if you want to test just a 10 character string, how long it is going to take all the combination to test? It takes close to the time of universe, 3 times, I'm sorry, 4 times the universe time in order to test all the combination. So the exhaustive testing is highly impossible. Then how does the testing happens in the software industry? So what I'll do is, for example, assume that Professor Mahesh throws a bachelor party. Okay, so the bachelor party, he throws a bachelor party, and then he develops a form, Google form, in which you need to fill in your age. Okay, the age criteria you need to fill, and then when you click on submit, it will generate a invitation. Okay, the invitation is generated based on the age criteria. So if the age criteria is between 18 to 30, then only the invitation is generated. If the age is not, if the age is below 18 and if the age is above 30, they're not allowed for the party. So now if you want to test such a system, so do you assume that you get a username password? You need to, I'm sorry, assume that you have a field called age. Okay, you need to enter first name, last name, and age, and click on submit. So you enter your first name, you enter your last name, then you click on age. When you select age, you no need of testing the age starting from 1, 2, 3, 4. Every age no need to test it. So how do you test it? So what I'll do is I'll divide this age into groups. That group is called as equivalent partition. Equivalent partition. So equivalent partition is nothing but valid group and invalid group. So what is the valid group here? 18 to 30 is a valid group. What is the invalid group? Minus infinity to 17 years. And what is the other invalid group? Plus 19 to plus infinity. So what I'll do is I'll take the values from these different groups and I test the system. So normally what we do, we take the values on the boundaries. So what are the boundary values here? 17, 18, 19 is on the lower boundary, and on the upper boundary 29, 30, 31. When I test it with this combination, then I say that this system is working fine. With this combination, when I test, it should be able to create the invitation, or it should say, sorry, you are not allowed into the party when I try to give an invalid range. So this is how you do the testing. Okay. So what are the different types of testing you have? You have unit testing, integration testing, system testing, performance or load testing, security testing, robot process automation testing. Let me tell you what are these different types of testing. When the developer creates his own piece of code, he tests his own piece of code. That is the module level testing. Such module level testing is called as unit testing. Okay, so once his module is ready, he puts that module into the central repository. And similarly, another module, dependent module, is developed by another developer. He also puts it into the central repository. Now you need to connect those two modules and test it. So integration is testing is nothing but testing two modules by integrating those two modules. That is called as integration testing. Once your entire system is available. That is, all modules are developed. You create the exe file and you test that exe file. That is nothing but system testing. System testing is nothing but, it is also called as functional testing. Functional testing is what? It is testing whether all the functionalities of the system is met, is called as functional testing or also system testing. And then comes your security testing, safety testing, performance testing. Okay, so what is performance testing, guys? Performance testing is nothing but checking whether your system is scalable, reliable, and robust. When I say scalable, does it allow users ranging from one user to 100 users, 1,000 users? Okay, you are testing with variable load. That is scalability. Reliability means if I ask for homepage, it should send homepage. Okay, so you're also checking whether the system is reliable. Then robust. How fast does it respond to the user query? So if I enter username, enter password, when I click on sign in, it should respond back within the market standard of less than 10 seconds. Okay, so what is performance testing? Testing whether the application under test is scalable. Scalable means testing with variable load. Load is nothing but users. Okay, scalable, reliable, and robust. So all three attributes of the system you are testing by using performance testing. Similarly, security testing, whether testing to check or to make sure the system does not allow unauthorized access to the application. That is security testing. Similarly, robot process automation testing. So whatever the human beings activities that we do, okay, in order to automate the human being activity, we use a robotic process, the tool called as robot process automation testing. So in software industry, what happens is there are certain redundant, or there are certain tasks which is repetitive. So repetitive tasks, instead of making those tasks to be done by the employees, what they do, they automate those tasks by using a tool called robotic process automation. You might have observed in the early 2019, you observed that most of the companies started laying off the employees. Why do they do that? Because most of the activities these days are happening in the agile world. And I told you, building, deployment, testing, they're all automated by using automation tools like Jenkins. Similarly, repetitive tasks are also automated by using tools like robotic process automation. So when most of the activities which are repetitive are done using the machinery, then what is the use of people who are not ready to evolve, or people who are not ready to adopt to the newer technologies? So when you can't adapt to the newer technologies, such people are identified and they are asked to leave the company. So always remember, learn it. Your VTU syllabus or your Jane syllabus would be in the order of incremental order, like agile methodology. Initially you learn C programming, data structure, C++, software engineering, operating system, Unix shell programming. Then you learn C++, you learn Java. Then you graduate into the learning of performance engineering. Then comes artificial intelligence, machine learning, edge computing, big data, cybersecurity, blockchain, Internet of Things, virtual reality, and augmented reality. So these are all the booming technologies. That means these are the technologies where there are less number of resources, due to which the salary of these employees are highly paid. For you to get into any of this technology, okay, so what is the prerequisite? You should have the prerequisite of C, C++, Unix shell scripting. You need to know software engineering. You need to know software architecture. You need to know operating system. You need to know all this in order to graduate into these words. So please don't ever get confused and straight away jump into these technologies. These days you see the advertisement saying that, oh, big data, we offer course within 1 month. So please never do that. First, be prepared with the basics. Then you get into the technologies related to this. So these are all master degree courses. Okay, then let us understand how does the internet works. Okay, so now assume that client makes a request to google.com. When the client sends a request to the google.com, what is happening is this request goes to the internet service provider. As we are in India, we have services like Vodafone, Airtel, and then you have Geo, where they are the internet service providers. What they do, they send your URL request to a DNS server. So what is the job of DNS server is, it will convert your URL address to an IP address. So how does it do is it maintains a directory. So if you remember in the early 1990s, okay, we used to use only the local landline. So when you got your landline, they used to give you a yellow pages book. It is a directory where it lists all the phone numbers of important people. So what happens similarly, whenever there's a request from a client on the internet service provider, it goes to the DNS server. The DNS server will check google.com. What is the IP address of google.com? And then it will return back to the end user. Okay. So then that, I'm sorry, it does not return back. I'm extremely sorry. So that address, so the your URL address is converted into IP address. Then it tries to locate that IP address on the internet wherever the server is. Okay, so you can see this is the internet connectivity. Okay, or it is called as internet backbone, or it is called as how does the internet work. So in order to tell you how internet works, let me go to this website now. Let me show you some astonishing things. So let me go to the, so your internet is nothing but it is connected via cables, right? So did you ever wonder whenever you try to access a server which is in America from India? So we are in India. Okay, when you try to access a server which is in US, some part of US, what is happening is actually your request is going to internet service provider. Then through internet service provider, it is getting DNS resolution, that is it identifies the IP address. If the IP address belongs to a company in US, then it needs to send that request to the company in US. So your request goes through the cable which is inside the Arabian Sea. Can you see this? This cable is passing through Arabian Sea. It goes through Middle East and it goes through Europe. Then it goes through North Atlantic Ocean. Then it goes through the person company which is located in US. So what is internet? It is nothing but it is a internet backbone is made of cable which are submerged inside the ocean, and this acts like a connectivity hub between nodes which are across the globe. Nodes is nothing but your computer systems. How these computer systems are connected? Via the cable. How this cable is submerged? It is submerged inside the ocean to connect different countries and continents. Okay, so this is how your internet really works. Okay, so now you need to also understand there's a difference between URL, URI, and URN. So most of the people do not know what is URL, what is URI, what is URN. So for example, if I try to access this URL address, this URL address consists of various parts. The first part is a protocol part. Okay, HTTP or HTTPS is a protocol. Then comes your host name. So neuralpruning.com is a host name. Then comes path. Okay, what is it called as path? Then comes your resource. The last part is will be normally a path or a resource. Okay, so normally what happens if you're trying to fetch a web page which consists of images, which consists of video file, which consists of audio file. So what happens is when you type neuralpruning.com, so basically there are three things which is happening. Your main request is calling for all resources available on the page. I told you every request that you make on a website, okay, for a website, every request that you make on a browser for a website has two types of resources: HTML resources, non-HTML resources. Okay, so your URL, okay, will in turn try to download all resources available on web page. Okay, so those resources are called as uniform resource name. Okay, so what is uniform resource name? It is the, for example, I'll tell you this. So assume that you want to meet me. In order to meet me, you need to know two information. One is my address, my address. The second thing is my name. Okay. When you come to my address, okay, assume that I stay in apartment. So you need to know what is my name and what is my apartment number. That name is your uniform resource name. Okay, so that address is your uniform resource locator. Okay, so what is URL? URL is just nothing but https://www.neuralpruning.com/course details. Till here is your URL. Okay, then what is URN? URN is nothing but the resource that you're trying to access, the last part. Okay, so this is the URN. So then what is URI? URI is nothing but uniform resource identifier. So what is uniform resource identifier? It is the combination of URL plus URN. Okay, got it? So what is URI? URI is nothing but URL plus URN. So whenever you try to send a URL on the website, it in turn makes multiple requests for multiple resources available on web page. So all the multiple requests are nothing but URN. Okay. Then what is URI? URI is nothing but it is a superset of URI and URL and URN. Okay. URI is a superset of URL and URN. Okay. So let me just demonstrate it with an example now. So assume that right now. So what is this? This is, see, though the protocol sometimes it does not show up on the browser where after you type. Okay, why? Because on the browser it identifies the protocol HTTP and HTTPS, so it does not show it. Okay, so now only when you type it comes up. After that, when it executes, it does not show up. So now this entire thing is what? URL. Now observe. I'll go and I'll click on a course. So let me click on a course. So when I click on a course, can you observe this? It adds another part to it. This is 16 is uniquely identifying my course called Class 11 Biology. Can you observe this? Similarly, if I go to C++, I go to a course called C++. So what is the unique identifier? The URN value of it, 7. So can you observe that? So uniquely identifying another resource. Got it? So this all together is URI. Okay, so this only till here is your URL. Okay, so this I think is something which you understood. Next slide, let me go to the next slide. Now performance testing, as I told you, what is this? It is a testing to determine whether the application is reliable, scalable, responsive under real world load. When it's a real world load, it is nothing but the expected load. Who is going to give you the expectation? The person or the company which want us to do load testing, they give us the expected load. So you test the system to that expected load. Okay, what is the objective of performance testing? When you say objective is nothing but goal. Why do we need to do it? In order to check whether the application is responsive, in order to check whether it is reliable, in order to check whether it is what configuration gives the best performance, in order to check at what capacity it starts breaking down, in order to check whether every new release that we are doing with the application, will it have any performance degradation, and also to check whether there is any bottleneck in the performance. So let me tell you each of them. So now response time, as you know, how fast does it respond to the user query? Straightforward. Reliability, does it give request to service? So if I ask for home page, it should give home page. If I ask for course page, it should give course page. That is reliability. Configuration sizing means I start testing the system with with a computer with which has 4 GB RAM, and then I use Internet Explorer, then I use Airtel as a internet service provider to connect to neuralpruning.com. Similarly, Professor Mahesh uses 8 GB RAM. He uses Windows operating system, and he uses Chrome browser, and he uses Geo internet service provider to connect to neuralpruning.com. So you test the system with different combination, right? So I need to know for which Chrome, I need to know which browser provides the best performance. Does it work very well on Chrome, or does it work very well on Mozilla, or does it work very well on IE? Okay, so you're checking different configuration of hardware, network, and also software. So when I say hardware, I mean to say my system is of 4 GB RAM. another system can be of 8 GB RAM, another system can be of 512 GB RAM, 512 MB RAM, sorry. Okay, similarly, when I say software, I'm testing with on Windows operating system, I'm testing it on Macintosh operating system, I'm testing it on Linux operating system. When I say network, I'm testing it with 2 gigabyte, 2 Mbps, 5 Mbps, 10 Mbps, 100 Mbps speed. Okay. Similarly, software combination can also be browser variation. I'm testing it on Chrome, I'm testing it on IE, I'm testing it on Mozilla, I can test it on Opera, I can test it on different types of browsers. Okay. Then that is the configuration size. Capacity planning. So the client tells our system should be able to take a load of 100 users. Okay, when you test it till 100 users, that is the expected load. Now, when the system goes live, I cannot just say that when it reaches 100, it should not break down. So I should know what is the maximum capacity that the system can sustain. After 100, I'll check with 105, 110, 115, 120 till the system will break. That breaking point I need to identify. Before breaking point, assume that system can take load of 220 users. So till 120 users, it is working fine. So 100 is your expected, plus 20 is your capacity. Okay, plus 20 users is your capacity. So you need to plan for your capacity. Okay, then regression. Regression means assume that now I released a version of the software, Android version. I have released. This is the latest version. So I do performance testing and then I release the product. So it is working fine. After few months, I release a new version. New version will have new features and bug fixes. When a new feature is added, will it have any adverse effect on the performance? So you need to test the old features and also the new features. How do you test the old features? By using your regression test cases. So those regression testing is also done in order to test your software. So what is regression performance testing? Regression performance testing is nothing but you are checking whether your newer version of the software meets the performance expectation. Similarly, bottleneck identification. Bottleneck identification is nothing but is there anything which is causing the system to fail? Okay, so systems failure is you check whether the system fails or not by using a technique called bottleneck identification. Got it? Understood? So now these are the various objectives of performance testing. And you have types of performance testing. What are the different types of performance testing? We have various types called as performance or load testing. Then you have stress testing. Then you have scalability testing, endurance testing, and volume testing. Let me tell you each one of them how they are different. Okay, load testing, endurance, stress testing, volume testing, and scalability testing. So when I say load testing, what I do is I need to test the system for 100 users. So what happens in real world? In real world, all hundreds users may not log into the system at the same time. Similarly, they may not log out to the system at the same time. But there is a possibility that all 100 users are doing certain activity after logging in. So similarly, when I emulate this condition in the testing world, I gradually ramp up the users. I run them for certain time and then gradually ramp down the user. Ramp up is nothing but gradually increasing the users. Okay. Ramp down means gradually decreasing the users. So whenever we test, we need to emulate the real world situation. In real world, the users will use the application, may not use the application at the same time. They'll use it in different time. Okay. Similarly, users will not log out of the system at the same time. They'll log out at a different time. So whenever I do a full load test, assume that I want to test my system for 100 users. So I start with 5 users and then 10 users, 15 users, like that I increment up to 100. Okay. How long I'm taking to increment? I'm taking close to 2 minutes in order to increment to 100 users. Then I run it for 5 minutes. Then I gradually decrease the load. Okay, so from 7 to 9 minutes, slowly users are logging out of the system. So whenever you do full load test, how do you do it? Gradually you increase the load to 100, run it for certain time, then gradually you decrease the load. Okay, so this is how you do the load testing. So similarly, when you are actually really doing the testing are really using the website, what do? You enter username, you enter password, you take some time, and then you click on login. That time that you take on a web page is called as think time. Every user has different think time. Yes or no? So one user who is very proficient to the website will type very fast. He'll type username, he'll type password, he'll click on sign in. Other user who is new to the website will take more time to enter username, more time to enter password, then he clicks on sign in. So there's a time taken by end user on every page before generating a next request. That wait time is called as think time. Similarly, when we test it in the testing world, we need to have think time between our user requests. Okay. So what do we look out when we do load testing? We need to make sure whether the system can handle the real world expected load. So what was the expected load from the client? 100 users. So you test the system by gradually incrementing the user from 0 to 100, and then you test it for certain time and you gradually ramp down the users. Okay, this type of testing is called as what? Load testing. Then comes stress testing. Stress testing is nothing but going beyond 100. Okay, assume that you tested your system to 100, then you increase beyond 100, you run it for certain time until the system breaks down. Okay, when I say breaking down, it is nothing but assume that accepted response time on the system. The client says every page should respond within 10 seconds. So up to 100 users, the system is responding within 10 seconds. When I increase it to 105, it is taking close to 11 seconds. Then when I do it till 150 users, it is responding between 12 to 15 seconds. Okay. Then the client says 20 seconds is questionable response time. Okay. Up to 20 seconds, 10 to 20 is questionable. Okay. After 20 is unacceptable. Okay. So now you keep adding users and checking the response time until you cross over questionable response time. When you cross over questionable response time, what happens? System stops responding. That point is called as breaking point. Okay, so identifying break point or crash point is nothing but stress testing. So what is stress testing? You go beyond the expected load until you reach the breaking point or the crash point. Then comes volume testing and endurance testing, scalability testing. So volume testing is nothing but your your system, you're checking whether it can take a large volume of data. So youtube or your internet download centers like torrents, there you try to upload large volume of data, you try to download large volume of data. Okay, so certain internet download centers are subjected to volume testing. So you try to run a scenario where you try to download or upload a huge volume of data. Such testing is called as volume testing. Okay, so here you are concerned more about the amount of data rather than response time. Then comes endurance testing. Endurance testing is nothing but testing your system for a long hours. So Black Friday in US. So whenever there's a Black Friday in US, what happens? They try to offer lot of offers, discounted offers on Walmart website. Okay, so all of a sudden on a Black Friday, throughout the day, the load on the servers is always there throughout the day. So on such days, okay, how do you make sure the system does not break? It is through endurance testing. Normally, load testing is done for certain hours, whereas endurance testing is done beyond days. For example, you do test your system for 24 hours, you test your system for 48 hours with the load and check whether system can sustain that load for an extended period of time. Okay, so endurance testing is nothing but doing the same load testing but for extended hours. Okay, similarly, scalability testing. Scalability testing is nothing but testing with mix of hardware, software, and network configuration to determine the system's performance on variable load. So you vary the load and then you test it with different browsers settings, you test it with different network internet service provider setting, then you test it with different uh, uh, operating system, you test it with different hardware configurations. So these are the different types of testings that you have with respect to performance testing. Okay, so as we are going out of the time, so I'll not be able to cover the entire content within 2 hours. As we are running out of time, so now let me give a time for you all in order to connect with me, in order to have share your questions. Before just passing over, let me just tell you there are various performance tools available in the market. For example, Load Runner, NeoLoad, and then you also have freeware tools like JMeter, Grinder. Okay, so paid tools, you need to pay the money and buy it. Freeware tools are free to use. Okay, so we use various tools in order to do performance testing.
Thank you, Sudhindra sir. Before going for a QA section, for the participants, I'll be sharing a feedback link in the chat box as well as in the Facebook chat box, YouTube chat box. We request all the participants to fill the feedback. There are certain points which you need to make note when you are filling the feedback. Make sure your name is spelled it correctly, as well as you have given correct email address, because since it is an auto certificate generation, if your mail ID is wrongly typed, the certificate may not reach you. So before sharing a link, these two instructions, please make sure your name is correctly entered and email ID is also correctly entered. So I'll be sharing a feedback link in the chat box. Meanwhile, parallel to this, sir will be here to answer your QA also. If any participant wanted to ask in a voiceover, probably you can raise your hand so that we'll give you a mic, let's say it as a rights. Thank you, Sudhindra sir. Over to you back again for QA section.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, guys, please let me know your questions.
So you participants can type your queries in the QA section, and you can also type your queries in the chat box.
Okay, what do you mean by speed? Speed is nothing but, I told you, the response time. How fast is your system responding back to your user request? That is speed. Okay, you can't reach this place. Try this. Make sure. But okay, so when you try when assume when you try to access any website, when you get a page, can't access a web page, or internal server error, or page not found. So these are all due to the server's unavailability. So you need to always remember this whenever you try to request a content on a website. Okay, there is a series of response codes that are returned by the server to the client. So the series vary from different ranges. For example, 200 series, 300 series, 400 series, and 500 series. 200 series means whatever the resource that you are requesting has been found by the server, and it is sending you that resource. If you see 300, it is related to redirections. Normally what happens, sometimes your request goes through a proxy server and then it reaches the real server. So all this redirection happens through 300 response code. And in case if you need to fill a form where exactly you're filling incorrect information, if you're giving incorrect details to the server, then it returns a response code with 400. Okay, so 400 response codes are due to client side errors. Okay, so if you make any errors while filling in the form and submitting it to the client, so the server sends you a web page with error code as 400 codes. If you see 500 codes, it means that server is unavailable. Server is not able to process your request. Okay, for it, 200 is for successful resource finding, 300 is for redirection, 400 is for mistakes that the client makes, 500 is the server unavailability. What is edge computing? So I told you these there are various technologies that are the highest paid salaries. That so now you know that there's a lot of gap between your compute and the storage. When I say compute, it is your CPU. When I say storage, it is your hard disk. Okay, so by using edge computing, so you know that your hard disk is very slow in operation. When I say operation, read write operation, whereas your CPU is very fast in read-write operation in current scenario. So edge computing is something, it is a technology which is booming up in order to make sure this speed gap that is existing between your CPU and the hard disk is minimized by using the technology called edge computing. Hello?
Sudhinder sir,
Huh.
I have a couple of queries from the YouTube also.
Okay.
One of the query is what kind of performance tool you will suggest for the bug testing?
See, we normally performance testing is not actually done in order to identify your functional bugs. So if you see the slides that I went through, so normally performance testing is done after your system is functional or stable. So let me show you that slide. So can you see this? Always you need to make sure your functional bugs is not identified during performance testing. Your performance testing objective is to check whether your system is scalable, reliable, responsive, all that. Okay. But before doing performance testing, the automation team, that is your system testing team, should say the application is functionally stable. When it says functionally stable, it means that all the functional errors or the bugs are completely eradicated. When I say completely eradicated, I told exhaustive testing is not possible. All minor errors is okay. Major and critical errors should be fixed. Okay. So when the application is functionally stable, then we do the performance testing. So the tools that suggest for performance testing is the industry standard tool for performance testing is Load Runner. Okay. Similarly, Neoload, and also you have tools like JMeter and Grinder. But LoadRunner is the tool which can support applications across various technology. It can support a Java application, .NET application, mobile application, Ajax application. It can support a SAP application. It can support cloud-based application. It can support big data application, IoT application. It can support blockchain-related application. It can support applications across various technologies. So the industry standard tool for performance testing is Load Runner, but the jobs that they demand from the performance tester, they demand saying that they want people who are well versed in Load Runner, Neoload, and JMeter. Why is it? Because Load Runner is very costly tool, Neoload is comparatively cheaper, JMeter is freeware. So as a tester, as a performance engineer, they expect you to know at least the three minimum tools: Load Runner, Neoload, and JMeter.
All right. For a couple of to answer a couple of queries from the audience, please give us some time. If the certificate is delayed, by the end of the day, people who have filled the feedback, everybody will get the certificate. And there are certain points which are displaying in the feedback. That's a reason to enable the auto certificate. So Google Suite has got a plugin where we need to give some points so that auto certificate will be enabled. That's the reason the points are displayed. People who have not received certificate, give us a time. By end of the day, we'll be processing all the certificates. And Sudhinder sir, there is one more query from the YouTube participant.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prashant sir and Sudhinder sir. Going ahead further, on behalf of Department of Computer Science Engineering, we thank Sudhinder sir for accepting our invitation and giving the presentation. We thank our management. We thank our director, dean, and HOD sir, and all the faculty members and organizing committee who supported this event to be great successful. Thank you, Sudhinder sir, one more time from Jain Deemed to be University for accepting our invitation and sparing your valuable time for today's session.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Going further, for the participants, we are processing the certificates parallelly. Whoever have not received, we request the participant to hold on till the end of the day. People who have not received the certificates, yes, you will receive the certificates. And to keep you updated, the session will be kept it as a live in the YouTube. Whenever you wanted to revise the session, it is there in the YouTube channel, which we have shared in the link in the chat box. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining the session. Thank you, Sudhinder sir. We'll be signing off now.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot.